welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. My name is Jessikah. I am your host today, and I am, as many of you who've listened to some of my podcasts before probably know, I am one of the hosts that is a huge mythology buff, which is super because we have an author here who wrote a Greek mythology-based book. So I am going to ask her to introduce herself and tell us about Medusa's sisters.
Hi, Jessikah. It's so nice to be here today. My name is Lauren Bear, and I'm the author of Medusa's Sisters, which comes out on August 8th. It is my first book, so I'm really thrilled to be talking about it, especially in support of the public library system, because I do not think that I would be a fantasy reader and writer today if it wasn't for a librarian at Dana Branch Library in Long Beach, California, who handed a very young Lauren a copy of Dealing with Dragons by Patricia C. Reed. And I think that's what cemented this type of literature for me. It was just such a formative text, and it awakened my imagination and my way of thinking about reading and writing. Just a huge fan.
Wow, that's actually a huge compliment. Thank you so much. I was a children's librarian for a while, and I certainly hope I was able to do that for somebody at some point, especially as somebody, someone who's I'm a fan
doing the good work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as a fantasy sci-fi person myself, who really, now I read all genres. But, when I was a kid, it really wasn't until I started reading fantasy that I became a reader. Before that, I was like, okay, I know all about the books that other people are reading, but they just didn't get me like fantasy got me. So thank you for that compliment, and thank you to your librarian for doing that for you. So let's talk about Medusa's sisters. So first of all, like I've mentioned before, I am a huge Greek mythology person. I'm a mythology person in general. Greek mythology was the first mythology I really latched onto. And I love all of these, fleshing out, retold, reframed stories of mythology, especially from the point of view of the goddesses and the women, because as I had said in an interview with, I believe, I'm trying to remember, it was the author of, was it Ariadne, I believe, I was talking, yes, I was talking about how, the stories of these women are usually about the hero that's adjacent to them. It's not so much about them. You have these stories of goddesses, and there are some Greek stories, Greek plays that do focus on the women. Antigone comes to mind specifically, but usually, the women are there, and the hero hangs with them for a while and then betrays them, and they're suddenly the bad guy because they are mad about it and take some sort of revenge. And then you hear more about the hero, but less about, the goddess that was left behind. So I love these stories. And one thing I particularly found interesting about Medusa's sisters was not only the fact that, hey, it tells the story of the other two Gorgons, because you don't hear a lot about them throughout mythology. Medusa is the one that you hear the most about. But also, it talks a little bit about Athena, and Athena in the story, which always kind of hurt me because while I was a huge mythology buff, Athena was my favorite goddess. And then, when I really got to like the nitty-gritty of the Medusa story, I was like, why Athena? Why did you, and then, there's another story, I believe, where Athena, like, I don't know, like claims that like, well, because she wasn't born of a woman, that the killing the mother was not, a crime. There's a few instances where I just can't jive with what Athena does. And so I was like, yes, here we go. This is going to be a story from not only Medusa's sisters' points of view, but it does kind of talk a lot about that. So talk to me about it. Talk to me about why the Gorgons, why Medusa's sisters, and how you came to making this your story.
Absolutely. Yes. With Athena, especially, I did not pull my punches with Athena. And she was my favorite when I was a kid too. But is that part of growing up, is like you destroy your heroes, kill your heroes or something? I completely agree with everything you said about this. I hesitate to use the word trend, more, an emphasis on retellings. And I think it's because the female characters in antiquity are so boring a lot of the times. They're really static. They're one-dimensional. I mean, what you were saying too, they're almost instruments or objects in the hero's journey, right? And
they're like MacGuffins.
Yeah.
I hate to say it. We just explained to my 8-year-old what a MacGuffin was yesterday. And that's just when you were saying instruments, that's what came to mind. They're used as MacGuffins.
Yes, totally. And I mean, Medusa, she's a head, she is further objectified. She's not even a full body that Perseus makes his name upon, right? When I had the idea, I was teaching middle school humanities at the time that I had the idea for the novel. And in 6th grade humanities, some of you might remember, you do like the introductory course to world history, ancient world history. And so I'm teaching my students about just the very basics of mythology. And something must have lodged in my brain, because a couple months later, I was up very late at night nursing my new daughter, and had one of those sleep deprived thoughts that come at 3 a.m. when you're not sleeping. And it was, who are the Gorgons besides Medusa? So I pull out my phone over my baby's head, and I of course go to Wikipedia, because that's what one does. And there was a quote from a 19th century classical scholar saying that the other 2 Gorgons basically don't matter. They're just appendages to Medusa. And that's a gut punch. Holding my baby girl in 2017 and hearing that a woman is an appendage was not what I needed to hear at the time. So I spent almost 2 years in primary source material looking for Steno and Euryale and not finding them really anywhere. And because of that, I got to create for them a much more, I hope, empowering, interesting, dynamic story.
Yeah, for sure. I believe you definitely did. And I there's a few things I want to talk about. One, I specifically want to ask about those primary sources and like that research, because that must have been really, really hard, that must have been something that, like, how do you even approach something like that?
You look through all the ancient Greek scholars, all the ancient Roman scholars who are writing at these time periods, pull up the primary source material. And then I did a lot of like search and find, and I would look for proper nouns, names, places, any of those kind of like keywords that would connect back to the basic Medusa myth, and expanded from there. But yeah, there really is not much to choose from. So I had a lot of fun with this book.
And I really also want to talk about like how you decided, like, how did you frame the voices of the other two? That's always very interesting to me. Like when you're writing something and it's not even like you had, that much to go on, like you were saying, like in other of these books, like, there's one about Clytemnestra and there's one, Pandora. There's a little bit more to go on, more so Clytemnestra, I suppose. But how did you sort of just like start hearing their voices? How did you know who, who's going to be Stethno, who's going to be, who Euryale was going to be? Yeah. Like, did they sort of kind of pop out at you? Did you really sort of have to like meditate on them? Because you did a really good job of making them very distinct from each other.
I think the first decision I made when I decided to tackle this novel idea, was I imagined them as Gorgons, so post-curse, post-transformation, and I knew they had to look different than that iconic image of Medusa that we all have in our minds, right? Of the girl, maybe she's screaming with all the green snakes. Everyone has seen that image. And I did not want Steno or Euryale to look like that. So once I gave them a different look and I could visualize that, their voices started to grow from there. The next decision I made was I knew it was going to be told in alternating voices, but I didn't want to give both characters a first person voice. I chose Steno, who's the oldest sister, to get the first person voice because, well, there's kind of an ending spoiler, so I don't want to reveal that, but she is the oldest sister. Perhaps I identify with her the most because I'm an older sister too. And then Euryale, I gave her a third person voice because I think perspective or access to perspective is a privilege in a way, right? And Euryale is a much more guarded off character. She's much more private, guarded. I felt like it made sense that she would have a third person narration. And then one more thing about voice that can be tricky is when you're writing about antiquity, you want to be respectful and like natural, authentic to that time period. You know, you're not going to be using slang vocabulary, writing about, I mean, like pre-Pericles Athens, right? Old Athens. But also make it accessible to modern readers. So you kind of have to find this in-between voice. I read a lot of Anne Carson because I think her translations of ancient Greek are phenomenal and so powerful and so modern, but still retain this, like, I don't know, arcane ancient lyrical quality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that like what I love is, you know, just kind of how you're coming at it. And I like what you were saying. I get what you were saying about the two different, the first person versus third person. It was just very, very different, very refreshing. And another thing, you know, it's so funny because when I was reading your story, I don't know why I always forget that Medusa was the only mortal of the three. And I liked, like, right away, that was just kind of that reminder of it, you know. But I do think that one thing that's good about this is, you know, I think this is accessible to people who are fans of mythology, but also people who are kind of new to it and they've just found this like subgenre of retellings of mythology. You know, in a way, I almost feel like it's sort of almost like how for middle graders, Percy Jackson has kind of brought, you know, kids to mythology when those books came out. And I don't know when things changed, but when I believe it was sixth or seventh, that's when we learned mythology. My kids were in second grade last year and they learned mythology in second grade. And it was it was very different. You know, hearing my second graders tell me about like Mount Olympus and everything. But you know, my husband started reading the Percy Jackson books to them, and now they want more mythology, but they came at it that way first. When those books came out, kids were kind of circling back to them. And I kind of wonder now, you know, you have this whole influx of people reading these books. I think that it is kind of shining a light to how great mythology is, but it's scratching an itch, like you were saying, you know, reading something where you have a scholar who says that, well, Medusa's sisters don't matter, you know, they're just there. Well, they existed for a reason in the text. You know, was it just to kind of like give her some like color that she wasn't the only one? Was three supposed, you know, was it the magical number of three? Or, you know, you want to know more. And I think that this is a really good time for people who are meditating on these things and get to show more of what they want.
That's actually one of my favorite things about the modern age, because there's a lot to be nervous about and upset about and scared about, right? I'm not in any way diminishing that. But one thing I do love is I think there is a hunger and a need for counter narratives. And I think that we ask better questions. Our kids are asking better questions. They care more about perspective. And that applies to real history and also like the mythological canon or any of the stories we've been told. And I think that when we take these old stories or old histories and we look at them from a new lens, we're transferring power. And I think it's really subversive and super cool. And I love this movement, you know. I think with mythology too, we look at stories from the past and they teach us about the past. But if we analyze the way we react to these stories, we're also learning about the present, right? So there's a quote I really love that I think about all the time. It's by Carlo Levi, and he's a Italian Jewish academic. And he says, the future has an ancient heart. And I love thinking about that. And it almost gives me this image of like interlapping hearts throughout time and people and the stories that we still care about. We still need to feel whole. It's one of my favorite ways of making and forging connections with my own place in human history is through myth.
I 100% love that. And I love, again, like I said, I love that, I recall back when I started studying mythology, it was kind of considered, oh, this thing you had to do, but now it's something people are really thirsting for. And it's not just the nerds like me who was like, oh my gosh, this is really cool, who had to really dig, like saw what people were digging for in it. This is something that makes it very accessible. It makes it very refreshing. And, I think somebody, and I've heard this said a few times, that mythology itself is sometimes considered to be the first form of fan fiction.
No, I love that. I love that.
Right? So it's only fitting that people would rewrite these myths or reframe these myths now to sort of expand on what they desire to see more of.
Well, and Ursula Le Guin comments on this too in her defense of genre fiction. She, gets upset that fantasy and science fiction are almost seen as like less than in terms of literary fiction when they're actually the oldest literary form. These are the oldest stories. And in some ways, these stories allow us to analyze and talk about the real world with more possibility. And I think that's the thing about myths is they're really universal. Like if you look at Medusa's sisters, the themes in this book are so applicable, I think, and relatable to normal lives. Toxic sexual relationships, right? Between men and women and all of the whole spectrum, right? There's the bonds of sisterhood, the jealousies of sisterhood. I heard a writer say one time that sometimes the more specific you get, the more universal it becomes, which shouldn't make sense, but it does. It's like, here we are in this very specific time place, old Athens with literal monsters and goddesses, yet those themes are still relevant today.
Absolutely. I couldn't say it any better. And I know there's one quote that jumped out at me, and I know it's jumped out at a few others. To have choices is to have power. Most women have neither. And that's like that's like that old trope. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, what was I going to say about this? Oh, yeah. Women in antiquity, I think there's a particular challenge to these stories, and that it's already these women, their lives were completely controlled by men, right? What they were allowed to do, what they were allowed to be. And then the record of those lives is also controlled by men. So they kind of disappear. They don't get to exist as real flesh and blood women unless we go back with imagination and empathy and bring them back to life.
110%. So what was your favorite thing about writing this book? And what are some other retellings that you really have loved?
When I wrote this book, I had just had my last baby, my third child, And I didn't want him to be around a screen all the time because obviously he's home with me. So I hand wrote almost all of Medusa's sisters. I would like do tummy time with baby Shay and I would write. And then at night when my kids were asleep, I would type it up. And that was a really great process for me. And it's what I've continued to do because it almost forms like your first round of editing and revising is the typing up part. So I've kind of created this model for myself. And then what was your other question? I was carried away in
what are some of your favorites? Like what are some of your favorites? Because there's a bunch.
I had a list, yeah, like some of my formative retellings. I loved Ahab's Wife, which obviously retells Moby Dick. I think that one is so great. I love Lavinia by Ursula Le Guin. Miss of Avalon was really huge for me when I was younger because I had never seen the scope of that kind of retelling with so many different voices. I just met Genevieve Gornichek, who wrote A Witch's Heart.
We just interviewed her. She's super, super cool. She's actually going to do an event with us about NaNoWriMo in the late fall, early winter.
That is awesome because she is awesome.
She is awesome.
Yeah, I love her books because you were saying that you love mythology, but Greek mythology is always the first, right? And none of us usually get to the Norse mythology, and she does that so well and has really made that material accessible to so many people. I think it's very cool.
I agree. And I love that your scope is like, it's not just mythology, that, this literature retellings as well. I think actually one of the most interesting of those, and it wasn't 100% it wasn't told from the woman's point of view, but it was definitely sympathetic towards the woman who's usually considered horrible, was the book The Smash Up. Did you read that?
Oh,
It's a retelling of Ethan Frome, but it's still from Ethan's point of view, but it's so pro Zoe or Zenobia, because it's told, it takes place in 2016, and the premise is, again, they're living in the Berkshires together, but they have this daughter who's on the spectrum. And the girl who comes to live with them is someone who's supposed to be kind of helping out in the house, but with the daughter more so. But Ethan is upset because his wife is so focused on this rage that she feels because of 2016, and she's meeting with her letter writing campaigns, and it's really much more sympathetic towards the wife, where like you're reading Ethan Frome and you're just like, dude, but you are cheating on your wife. Like, let's be honest. Like,
it's like Rochester. Like your wife is in the attic, dude.
Yeah. Come on. Yeah, exactly. So, that was one to me that I thought was really, really interesting. And I don't want to give too much away about it, but it went in places I was not expecting. I thought it was really good.
Cool. Oh, you know what I should add too? I was just thinking Grendel.
Yes.
Because what I love about that one too is not just a retelling of the monster, which who doesn't love? We are so obsessed with the psychology of monsters and what makes a monster, what creates one, right? But then also to make it so literary and so fresh and inventive. That's a great one.
Did you ever read The Mere Wife by Maria Devana Headley? That's another retelling of Beowulf, and it's kind of bizarre, but it's about really Grendel's mother, but it's almost got like a suburban background. I don't know how else to describe it, but it is very interesting.
See, this is the problem is when I talk to fellow book people, my TBR list gets so long.
Same.
Like I could be reading for the next 10 years straight and I would not get through it.
Well, let's tell our readers to check out Medusa's Sisters, because not only are they going to love it, but they are going to now start picking up all these other books that we were talking about, because they're going to be like, oh, we love this. Let's check out these others.
Reading begets reading. I firmly believe that. So it's good. Be a slutty reader, read it all.
Thank you so much, Lauren Bear. I love that. Be a slutty reader. If I would not probably get kicked out of work for putting that on a t-shirt.
I know, right? Put it on my button.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, once again, this was Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. Author of Medusa's Sisters, Lauren Bear. Thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you for coming and chatting with us.
I had a blast. Thank you so much, Jessikah.
We are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.